Welcome to Stream of Conscience, brought to you by Democracy for America, Fairfield County, where we believe that change is possible and you can make it happen. I'm your host, John Hartwell. Our guest today is Jim Cameron, chair of the Metro-North Rail Commuter Council, a volunteer organization whose members are appointed by the governor and legislative leaders in Hartford. Jim became a transit advocate in the early 90s as he saw firsthand the deterioration of services on Metro-North. And rather than just getting mad, he got himself appointed to the council. He's been chair for 4 years. And he also publishes a bi-weekly newspaper column called Talking Transportation, which now runs in 23 newspapers across the state. Jim, welcome back to Stream of Conscience.
Thanks, John. Great to be here again.
So Jim, you and I have been on the council together for about 3 years. And I joined after you'd become the chairman, and we work every month to try to improve the rail commuter experience here in Fairfield County. And we've been dealing recently with a lot of issues that I think commuters are very interested in, one of which is the Stamford garage, because DOT is
Right.
going to be replacing that garage. They've got a program in place to do it. And we haven't been entirely happy with how they've gone about that. So let's talk about the garage situation in Stamford.
Well, the old garage at the Stamford train station we have known for almost 10 years would have to be either replaced or repaired. The DOT crunched the numbers and they realized it would be more expensive to repair it than to outright replace it. So as part of that replacement process, they are invoking what's buzzword these days, transit-oriented development, to look at doing more than just rebuilding the garage, maybe putting something else there as well too. So there is an RFP which was issued, a request for proposals from various developers, and one of the requirements was that they would have to replace the 1,000 parking spaces in the old garage. They're going to do that, but not necessarily where the old garage is. Right now the old garage is just uber convenient. It is right there, right next to the train station. It's connected by covered walkways, so you could, in inclement weather, get from your car to the train without having to get out onto the street. The RFP says that the new garage would have to be within a quarter mile of the existing train station. That may not sound like a long walk unless you're schlepping bags in the middle of a blizzard. So the council has been very concerned and pressed very hard to make sure that the garage would be replaced where it is now.
The old garage is literally falling apart, and the Connecticut Department of Transportation has concluded that it's much cheaper to tear it down and to replace it than to fix it. Jeff Marin is on the Metro-North Rail Commuter Council, an advocacy group for commuters, and he wants a new garage to be built exactly where the current one is, right next to the station.
As a commuter, the three main points that I would consider for the garage, the most important, are: one, maintenance of the roadway and ceilings; secondly, signage and flow, the traffic patterns and the speeders in the garage; and third, when and if the garage is replaced, that it must be done on the site of the current garage.
That may or may not happen depending on what these RFP proposals look like. And that's our big concern.
Let me jump in here for just a second, because when we say the old garage, in fact, the garage that's in place right now next to the Stamford train station is really two structures.
That's right.
There's the old garage, and then there's a surround that they put around it, which is actually going to stay in place regardless of what happens. They're not going to tear down the entire structure.
Right.
They're only going to tear down the piece that was built around 1980 or so. Is that right?
Yes, and that new garage, which has been thoroughly integrated into the old garage, is connected on all levels, etc. So we know a couple of things. First of all, the demolition of the old garage is going to be very difficult given the tight spaces that are there.
Yeah.
It's going to take a long time, and it's going to create just a mess. So our proposal was try to replace the existing garage with some temporary parking in the vicinity.
Right.
Tear down the old garage, build a new garage in its place, maybe put something on top of it if you wish, but keep the parking where it's most convenient for commuters.
Right.
What looks as if is going to happen is that some developer is going to propose to put as much as 1 million square feet of office and residential space on that footprint of the old garage, build a new garage someplace within a quarter mile, and inconvenience 1,000 daily parkers who are now going to have to walk to the train. That's going to make Stamford less desirable as a jumping off point for commuters. It's certainly going to make the DOT a lot of money, and one of the things that they said they were looking at in their proposals was how much money the DOT was going to make.
Right.
And in effect, what we're allowing the state to do is to sell the crown jewels, to cash in its chips to a private developer to put something where commuters would best be served with more parking and inconvenience 1,000 commuters by moving them up to a quarter mile away.
And one of the trade-offs here, obviously, is the capital cost of the new facility, and the more money that you could get from a developer to whom you would be giving development rights in that neighborhood in trade for participating in the garage building, is to the benefit of the taxpayers. At least some people would make that argument.
We'd hope. It depends on where DOT decides to spend that money. If they use it to subsidize rail fares, that's one thing. If the governor gets his hands on it and uses it to fill another budget gap, that's a whole other issue.
Right. So now, also, one of the things that DOT is saying is that the replacement garage is going to be built first so that people who are parking at the station will have continuous service.
Yes.
But as you said, it could be as far as a quarter mile away.
Right.
And we have no assurances at this point that the walkway between the new garage and the current station would be covered or protected from the weather. And as you pointed out, it is possible today to get from the current structure into the station without ever going into the weather, which, as we know, when it gets nasty here, is a big benefit for convenience. You know, the convenience is proximity, and the comfort level there of being able to go through a covered walkway is really a huge part of all of this.
I mean, I'm not against transit-oriented development, but there is plenty of land within a quarter or a half mile of the train station in Stamford where a private developer could put up an office and a residential building.
Right.
It doesn't need to be right next to the train station. And in reading the proposal, one of the things we noticed was that even the DOT itself admitted that a 1 million square foot building of residential, office, retail space would require 2,000 parking spaces.
This is in addition. These 2,000 parking
just for the
spaces.
building alone.
Just for the building.
Not for commuters.
That's right. Nothing to do with commuters. 2,000 more parking if they went to 1 million square feet. So that's the outside possibility.
That's the worst case or best case scenario.
Right.
Might be less than that.
Now, in all of this process, Jim, the government is required to have hearings.
Yes.
Before anything happens.
Right.
And there was a hearing. But talk about that hearing that was in Stamford last month.
Well, there was one environmental hearing, which the council used as an opportunity, the first chance that residents and users of the garage finally had a chance to step up and say, what are you doing?
Right.
So we used that environmental hearing as a soapbox on which to stand up and let the DOT, which represents us as commuters, know how angry people were. And we got a fairly good turnout of people who did that. The net result was that the governor, being former mayor of Stamford, realizing how important the train station and transportation are to not only that city but the state's economy, has created a task force which includes a representative from the Commuter Council, the business interests, some architectural planning, somebody from the city as well too, who are going to be made privy to these secret RFP proposals.
Well, we hadn't mentioned that in fact the RFPs we can't see because there's somehow proprietary competitive information in them that the DOT feels it would be wrong to show to the public because that would then take something away from the people who are proposing them. So
what we were looking at originally was a secretive process that was going to review these proposals, and we don't know how many there are, 4 or 5, 1 or 2. Make a decision behind closed doors, and in December or so, present the finished result to everybody that's concerned.
Without any real input from the public.
Exactly.
And this environmental hearing was to look at something that had not yet been decided. So one wonders, in fact, how one can have an environmental hearing when you don't know exactly what you're hearing about. So the whole process has been one that's has been troubling. But I think that the fact that the governor has responded by naming this panel and bringing in a bunch of other people, all of whom, in fact, could be good stakeholders in this process. The mayor has people in it, the council has got people in it, our council has got people in it, the town council has got people in it.
Yep.
So, in fact, this has been a good outcome, at least process-wise, to get more done. And it's because the Rail Commuter Council got out there, organized people, got people to show up. So how did we do that? How did we get people to come to that meeting? What's the process that we use for communicating with the public?
Well, a couple things. First of all, the Commuter Council has, over the years, developed an email list of commuters who have stepped forward and identified themselves as being interested in hearing from the council about issues such as this. So I've got a very powerful email database that we use to, first of all, reach out to hundreds of Stamford commuters. We also got permission from the DOT, and we needed their permission, to actually go into the garage and put a leaflet on every car saying there's going to be a public hearing.
Right.
They didn't have to give us that permission. If they hadn't, we would have probably done some guerrilla action, but we felt it was important to let the stakeholders know.
Right.
At the environmental hearing, I pointed out that there were no signs in the garage. There was no notification from the DOT of this process that was going underway. And thanks to the media, especially the Stamford Advocate, we were able to get some media coverage of this issue. That got people's attention as well, too.
We also have a Facebook page.
We have a Facebook page. We have a Twitter page, with Twitter feed, email alerts as well, too. So we really rely on electronic and social media because we have no budget as a council.
That's
we
right.
have no money to reach out to let people know what's going on. And when commuters heard of what was being planned and felt that they had been kept in the dark by the DOT, they rose up with pitchforks and torches and marched on this environmental hearing.
Right. And I would point out that when we went in, it was you and I who did it, and a couple of other people into the Stamford garage at an early morning with 1,000 or so pieces of paper in our hands to go car by car and put them on the window.
Yep.
That came out of our pockets.
We paid for those Xeroxes ourselves.
Yep. So this is volunteer. The council is volunteer. There's no pay for this. We show up every month to have meetings where we have representatives from the Department of Transportation and also Metro North attends our meetings, and the press attends our meetings, and sometimes state legislators attend our meetings, and we work very closely with several of them. But this is a volunteer operation. I think it shows that being involved in the community is a good thing to do and can bring good things to the community.
And I think the commuters thank us as a council, as the individuals that did this, for letting them know what their state government was going to do to them.
Right. Now, you have just come back from a trip overseas where you rode on trains of a different sort. Now, we've been getting new train cars here. The M8s have been coming in, and they've been performing reasonably well, and they're still in a period of transition, figuring out what really is going to work here and what needs to be fixed and tweaked, et cetera, going forward. But you rode on some trains that were from another time frame altogether. Tell us about that.
Well, interesting, the M8 cars that we have now in Metro North are being built by Kawasaki, a Japanese company, but they're being built in the United States. So my wife and I have long wanted to go to Asia, and we did that in October. We went to both Japan and China. And being a rail fan, I had to ride trains wherever it is we go.
Right.
So in Japan, I had a chance to ride what's called the Shinkansen, which is the oldest bullet train in the world. The Japanese started their high-speed rail service in the 1960s. So they have about 50 years of experience with high-speed rail.
Incredible.
And what they did was they built a parallel set of tracks to their existing train stations, dedicated specifically to these high-speed trains. I rode between Tokyo, the downtown train station, and Kyoto on the busiest line that they have. They're equivalent of the Washington to Boston corridor in terms of traffic and intensity. Just to contrast what Amtrak does with Acela, which is the United States' excuse for high-speed rail, that train on average between Washington and Boston only does 70 miles an hour, carries 300 passengers. The Shinkansen train that I rode carries 1,300 passengers per train, averages 160 miles an hour,
Wow.
and runs not once an hour like Acela does, but every 10 to 15 minutes.
Amazing.
So when you book a seat on this train, you arrive with a ticket that gives you a car number and a seat number. You line up on the platform at a position that's indicated on the tiles there that says, this is where car number 10 will stop. The passengers literally queue up. The train arrives to the second. The doors open, people get on, and it leaves. The intermediate stops, the train stops for 90 seconds. People get off, people get on, it continues on its journey. So that's the oldest, now 7th generation of the Shinkansen service. Then we went to China, which has undertaken a $250 billion investment in high-speed rail.
So that would be $250 billion.
$250 billion.
Right.
And we both know that a fair amount of that has gone to corruption and graft, but they have built the largest, and to my thinking, best high-speed rail system in the world. We went from Beijing, which is a city of, I believe, 18 million, to Shanghai, which is a city of 23 million, on a brand new, purpose-built right-of-way.
They didn't go along the old right-of-way. They just made a new one.
And it's amazing what you can do in a totalitarian state. If you say we're going from point A to point B, and there's people in the middle, tough. You move, we'll get you some new hovel to live in someplace. But they have built a train system that is the envy of the world. The distance between Beijing and Shanghai is 814 miles. They did that distance on the train I rode in 5 hours, averaging 200 miles an hour. The distance between New York and Chicago is less. It's only 700 and something miles. Amtrak takes 19 hours to do that distance, and they only have 2 trains a day. The Beijing to Shanghai run has departures every 10 minutes. Again, trains that carry 1,300 passengers at incredible speeds. If you could imagine being able to go from New York to Chicago in 5 hours, or New York to Florida in 6, what that would do to change our world, our economy, our travel patterns. It would put a lot of the airlines out of business.
Well, it would, because let's say you're going New York to Chicago today, and let's say you live in Fairfield County, so you have to drive down to LaGuardia and get on an airplane there. So there's an hour trip to LaGuardia plus a half an hour to park, et cetera, get into this. So let's call it at least an hour and a half you have to leave ahead of time, maybe 2 hours ahead of time. Then there's the flight, which is what, 2.5, 3 hours?
2.5 hours, yeah.
2.5 hours. And then at the other end, you've landed at O'Hare, and if you want to get into the city, you've got to do whatever to get into the city.
Another hour at least.
Another hour at least.
Yeah.
So what we're saying here is that if you had a train like this from New York to downtown Chicago, and it took 5 hours or 6 hours, it would be exactly the same amount of time with a whole lot less hassle.
That's right, and a lot less impact on the environment.
Way less impact on the environment.
But I mean, you have to go to countries like China or Europe to see rail like this.
Right. I've ridden the TGV,
the Train à Grande Vitesse, yes,
in France, and I remember looking out the window and seeing the car. We were going faster than the cars, and I thought, oh, okay, that's, of course you can go faster than cars. But then I look out, and those cars are actually on the motorway. Yeah. So those guys are doing 70, 80 miles an hour at least. Right. And we were moving right on past them.
Right.
So yeah, it was great. It was very smooth. It was very comfortable, and obviously very fast.
But I don't think we're ever going to see something like that built in this country. Because we don't have, well, first of all, the money, $250 billion. We barely have enough money to keep operating the train system we have today. Amtrak is constantly going hat in hand to a Republican Congress that doesn't like trains.
I asked you about the trains in Japan when you were there. I sent you an email because you were talking about these great trains, and I said, so how much is the subsidy? And you said?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, those are private railroads that are run at a profit. I don't know who paid for the tracks or the trains. Right. I don't know if they get subsidized, but I was told that those are profitable railroads.
Okay.
And certainly the ridership that they had. I mean, Amtrak's Acela is ostensibly profitable. Amtrak made something like $70 million last year
Really?
in the Northeast Corridor between Acela and the Northeast Corridor trains. Now, that's all going to be eaten up by the maintenance of the right-of-way. You know, we're dealing in the Northeast with a 100-year-old right-of-way, the path that the tracks take.
More.
And the tracks need to be maintained, the catenary needs to be maintained, and somebody has to pay for that. The bridges are falling down or freezing shut.
Yep.
The Chinese have solved that problem by building a completely brand new system. And we paid for that. We paid for that every time we go to Walmart and buy something made in China. I mean, we have subsidized our economic rivals in building and what the world will envy as probably the best high-speed rail system in the world. Transportation Commissioner LaHood has toured the Chinese rail system, and he said, you know, it's amazing what you can do when there are only 3 people required to make a decision. I mean, looking at what we just discussed with the Stamford garage, where it takes a group like the Commuter Council, concerned individuals, to try and oppose what the state is planning to do. If there were environmental impact studies in China required, never get built. If the people that were being dispossessed from their homes had any say in the matter, never get built. They've built that entire system in a decade. Plus, they have also built the equivalent of our interstate highway system. I mean, they have controlled access roads, some of them supported with tolls, that are covering much of the nation. And they have done all that in an incredible period of time because they're a totalitarian regime and they can do pretty much whatever they want.
But it's also because they've been very successful in industrializing and selling to the world.
Absolutely.
And they have a lot of money on hand to build with.
They've got the capital from people like the United States to be able to do that.
So bringing it back here to Connecticut and the Rail Commuter Council, where do you see the train travel going in the next few years here? We've got the new M8 cars coming in. I think that they've been pretty successful and not flawless by any stretch of the imagination, but I think they're doing pretty well. What else can we expect to see in terms of developing rail capability here in Fairfield County?
Well, I've never been one to be shy about criticizing Metro North when I felt they deserved criticism, or the DOT. But to be fair, I also think that we have turned the corner. I think the DOT and the Metro North have listened to commuters, are doing a much better job not only at bringing in new equipment, but also communicating with passengers. I think over the 15 years I've been on the Commuter Council, there has been a complete sea change. It is a much better railroad today than it was a decade ago. It is more reliable, more convenient, more expensive than it used to be. But I think that Metro North is the world-class railroad that its employees want it to be. The next steps are, as we add more cars, hopefully being able to add more trains, more service.
Right.
We've just seen on the weekend almost a doubling of the number of trains, adding half-hourly service where there was only hourly service. As we make service available, it will attract more riders. They're also getting ready to start rail service between New Haven and Springfield on what they're calling a high-speed line, but it's no Shinkansen, it's higher speed. That will, I think, be very important psychologically for people in Hartford to see the value of commuter rail and understand why it's important to invest in it across the entire state. Shoreline East service will be expanded to New London. I think it could easily be expanded beyond that to Providence. Through train service, so you're not going to have to get on one train in New London, get off in New Haven, and get on another train. The M8 cars will be able to run that distance.
Good.
So I see a lot of improvement ahead for better service. That one of the challenges that the council is still hoping the DOT will face is the issue of how do you get on the train, how do you park at a train station. Parking is still an issue in southern Fairfield County. In Darien, where I live, the waiting list for annual permits is about 8 years. That's to the point that people might not choose to live in Darien. They might move to Fairfield or Westport
And we've
or
heard
someplace
from the
else.
commuters in Stamford the same thing, that if the parking garage goes away and it becomes a quarter mile away from the station, there are people in Stamford who are saying, okay, well, I'll just drive to the city because it'll no longer be that much more convenient to take the train.
Or new people who are looking for a place to live might not choose to live in those communities.
Right.
They might live someplace else.
Yeah.
That's going to lower the property values.
Yeah.
So I think the towns are starting to realize, because the DOT owns the stations and the garages,
Yeah.
the towns which had been somewhat resistant to decked parking structures, expanded parking,
Right.
are realizing they're shooting themselves in the foot. They're actually hurting their own communities by stopping the DOT from doing what it needs to do, which is to expand access to the new trains by adding parking and making it more convenient for people to get on those trains.
So Jim, just to sort of sum up here, the Commuter Council meets every month on a Wednesday night. It's the third Wednesday, I think?
Third Wednesday of the month, usually.
At Stamford in the government center there, usually
Right.
on the second, third floor.
The offices of SWRPA, the Southwest Regional
right.
Planning Agency.
We'll obviously put up the email addresses and the websites, and we very much want people to be involved. The meetings are open to the public.
Right.
You're welcome to come or communicate with us through email, through Twitter, on the Facebook page. We respond. People who make complaints about the railroad, we pass those on to the
Yep.
railroad and ask them to follow up. So we're there. We hope that people will use us.
We're commuters advocates, so
That's
if
right.
you have praise or criticism or a complaint, use the Commuter Council to help escalate those to the right people, because the railroad wants to do a good job. You know, the people that work for the railroad are honorable, well-intentioned individuals.
They sure are.
They listen to the council when we come to them with a complaint or an issue.
Yes.
And they respond not only to us, but also the complainant.
Yeah. Jim, thanks so much for coming in.
A pleasure.
And, it's good working with you.
Thank you. Good to have you on the council, too.
That's our show for this week. We hope you enjoyed it. You can find all our shows on YouTube by going to youtube/user/DFATVNet. We're also on Facebook and Twitter. Or you can send comments or suggestions for a show to info@dfa-tv.net. If you'd like to learn more about progressive political action, we meet at 7 p.m. on the first Wednesday of the month at the Silver Star Diner in Norwalk. We'd love to have you join us. Remember, change is possible, and you can make it happen. This has been Stream of Conscience, and I'm your host, John Hartwell. Thanks for watching.